Okay, it looks like they started to assign everybody to the rooms. So we'll go ahead and get started. Plan on 10 minutes apiece, you guys, 5 minutes and 5 minutes. And we'll start with Cheryl Gray from USF.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cheryl, and like Kelly said, from USF. I study occupational health psychology, so that's applying psychological principles to enhance employee well-being. And the study that I'm going to be sharing today is called Examining the Effectiveness of Leaders' Responses to COVID-19. So just to provide like a brief background, there's been all sorts of research looking on how leaders can effectively help their employees when they're navigating difficult circumstances like a crisis like COVID-19. And what it shows is that leaders who are trying to be helpful do a lot of great things, but they actually also do some things that are well-intended but end up being harmful. So for example, during the Christchurch earthquakes, there was a study that found that leaders do a lot of great things like engaging in a lot of close communication, but they also did things that employees didn't like preventing their employees from talking about the devastating events at work. So what this study aimed to do was to look at how can leaders really be helpful during this COVID-19 situation. So we asked 3 main research questions. What can organizational leaders do that's helpful? What can they do that might be well-intended but ends up being unhelpful? And how can we differentiate between what's helpful from leaders and what's well-intended but unhelpful? So to answer these questions, we administered an open-ended online survey, got responses from about 200 nurses, 200 university staff employees, and 200 engineers. And we just asked them to describe a time when they received help from their leader that was really helpful during COVID-19. And we asked them to describe a time in which they received help from a leader that ended up not being very helpful or even harmful. And we got some really interesting responses. Let me see if I can zoom in on this. So here is a university staff employee who described an incident getting helpful support from their leader. They said, I'm allowed to work during hours that differ from the normal 8 to 5 so I can help my school-age child complete their schoolwork. I believe I'm ultimately more productive because of the flexibility, and it has given me complete satisfaction with my job. So employees really liked getting flexibility from their leadership during COVID, but then we saw some things that employees didn't like. So if we zoom in on this unhelpful support example from an engineer, they said, every day we receive email communication with updates to our policies because of COVID. These emails are well-intended, but not helpful. The quantity of emails is too much. Less time is spent on production when we have to read all of these policy emails. So I got lots of examples of leaders doing things that were helpful and leaders doing things that were well-intended, but unhelpful. And what my colleagues and I did was we categorized these into actually 14 helpful actions and 16 unhelpful actions. And for example, we got helpful things like encouraging employees to work from home as much as possible. Employees appreciated that. Providing extra safety equipment, PPE, they appreciated that. Things like expressing a lot of gratitude during this time was helpful. But then some examples of unhelpful things were like receiving excessive email communication, like the engineer talked about, or asking their employees to fill out extra timesheets when they were working at home, or even providing food without addressing more important issues. So from there, once we had our helpful and unhelpful actions, we were able to come up with themes that really differentiated what makes leadership support helpful versus unhelpful. And we have those listed here. So there's things like autonomy. Employees really appreciated having a lot of autonomy. They didn't like when their leaders were providing additional oversight, even if it was well-intended. And they really liked targeted communication, but they didn't like excessive email communication. Let me see if I can find a fun quote for some of these. We've got personal resources, like employees liked mental health resources. They loved financial support if their organization could do so. But they didn't necessarily like things like food. That had much more mixed reception. Safety was another differentiator. They really liked employees who fostered a strong safety climate. not so much leaders who maybe provided equipment but didn't encourage their employees to actually use it. What's this next one? We've got timing. They loved leaders who reacted quickly and implemented changes as soon as necessary. And it seemed like leaders who made more delayed decisions tended to foster uncertainty, and that ended up being unhelpful. Tone was another interesting one. There was a nurse who said that their leadership was trying to spread a lot of helpful information regarding COVID, but it really felt like fear-mongering because the tone was so negative. So employees really liked positive, uplifting messages rather than really upsetting or messages with a negative tone. Yeah. And then our final two were work equipment. Employees loved getting new work equipment, especially if they were transitioning to working from home, but they needed adequate technological support to accompany that. And then finally, they liked leaders who really protected them from work underload or work overload. But you have to be careful how you do that. There was a story of a nurse who talked about how their leader tried to allocate more untrained help to assist and lessen the workload, but they ended up requiring more training, which took more time. So those are some of our findings. So basically, in conclusion, leaders are really important during circumstances such as COVID-19. They can do a lot of good, but they can also, unfortunately, sometimes not do so much good, even when they're well-intended. So leaders should be careful to provide helpful support and to avoid providing unhelpful support. And I will open it up to any questions.
So I already put one in the chat, but was that 200 sampling system by design, or was there a rationale there, or that's just the way things shook out?
That was how many we got. Yeah, I mean, that's how we did have funding. Thankfully, the Sunshine ERC was kind enough to provide funding. So we had funding allocated to get about 200 of each. Yeah. And that's a pretty large sample for a qualitative study. It was a lot of data to go through. And yeah, it was really cool to get that many insights.
It's really cool. I think there was a big learning curve on both ends for employers and employees when they first started working from home. So they had to all learn how to do it. So you captured a lot of that in your study too. And I was thinking as you were going over it, how sometimes people email or text and how that comes across different than if you're in person too. So yeah, does anyone else have questions? If you can unmute yourself and ask or type it in the chat.
Did you find anything related to what leaders could do specifically to provide helpful rather than unhelpful social support? It does seem like it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah, so I think some of the key takeaways would be to provide as much flexibility as you can. Another one would be to provide really clear, targeted communication. So maybe like one example that I was thinking about is instead of sending out an email update every day when something new happens, maybe just consolidate it into like bullet points maybe once a week, or include like the key information in an email and have a website where people can look for additional information if they want it. So being concise in communication, keeping an uplifting tone throughout communications, things like that. And then involving employees in decision-making as much as possible too.
Excellent. Anybody else? Okay, thank you, Cheryl. We'll move on to Joseph Regina from University of South Florida. I'm pulling up yours now, and you can have control of that.
Sweet. I'm just waiting on it to show. There it is. So thank you for setting the stage, Cheryl. I always love watching you present.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm a fourth year. I'm also in Cheryl's program. I'm biopsychology at University of South Florida. I also study occupational health psychology, and particularly I look at the idea of psychological well-being. There's only a few of us that are in here that aren't speakers. So who happened to actually look at the poster beforehand? Because if not, I'll spend some time on the front end, and if not, I won't. type some thoughts in the chat if you don't mind. I did not. Okay, cool. So I will start at the beginning because we have time. So my research primarily focuses on the idea of workplace rivalry, which is the idea that you have someone at work who you value outperforming more than everyone else. I've conducted qualitative studies on this previously, and what I found is people compete on a lot of different things. They compete on how much recognition they get from their boss. They compete on bonuses. They compete on sales. A lot of people compete on how good their relationship with their boss is. And that can build out of a lot of different places in terms of rivalry. Sometimes it can be kind of petty. Like in one case, someone felt they had been passed over for a new desk at work. They didn't get their own office, and that bothered them because they'd been there longer. In some cases, it's just incivility and bullying. So it comes out of a lot of different areas. What I looked at in this study, which was actually my thesis that thankfully was funded by the Sunshine ERC. So thank you, Kelly, since you're the main representative here today. But what I looked at here was the impact specifically on rivalry among STEM workers, with the idea of focusing specifically on women in STEM, because it shows that not only is STEM understaffed, there are millions of unfilled STEM jobs, but one of the reasons why is because women turn over from STEM fields at a greater rate than men after entering the workforce. So traditionally that used to happen at the educational level, but that leak has somewhat been sealed. But nonetheless, it's still continuing in the workforce. So what we're looking at here is potentially whether or not the experience of rivalry is contributing to that. And we did find some evidence that it was, which was really exciting. So we use social comparison theory, the idea that you compare yourself to others. Oh, goodbye, poster. I have it pulled up on mine. I can just keep going. It's all good. So what we wound up proposing was two main sets of hypotheses. So one is that having a rival would relate to increased turnover intent, both from your job and from your STEM field. The second was that relative standing, so the idea that you were better or worse off than your rival, would impact that as well, with the idea that if you perceive yourself as losing, quote unquote, to your rival, you'd be more willing to leave your job and or the field. We also proposed two mediators there from relative standing, the idea of imposter syndrome, the degree to which you basically feel like you're faking it at work and no one's caught on yet. I know it's probably an academic audience, so I imagine we're all pretty well versed in the idea of imposter syndrome. We also looked at perceived competence, which is basically the idea of how do you perceive yourself as being good enough at your job. And then beyond that, we tested the idea of focal actor gender. Are you a man or a woman? On those relationships to turnover intent. And what we found across a 3-time point survey of full-time STEM workers, attrition's really fun. So we had 900 people at time 1. By the time we got to time 3, we only had 350 or so, which is obviously a pretty large drop off. But what we ended up finding were a few significant results that I thought were really interesting. So did we determine if we could zoom in here? Can we? Oh, we can. This is beautiful. So I'm going to zoom in on this correlation table as much as I can. That really didn't help all that much, so sorry, guys. But what we ended up finding, I'm going to zoom this back out because this looks hideous. We ended up finding was that having a rival was related to job turnover intent. Those that had a rival were more willing to leave their jobs. Supporting hypothesis 1, at least partially, we did not find a significant relationship there for STEM turnover intent. We didn't hypothesize, we also found that having a rival related to imposter syndrome. Beyond that, related to relative standing, we found that it was related pretty strongly. Our correlations by psych standards, usually a large correlation for us, going to be like 0.3. And what I found for relative standing was a correlation of 0.28 to perceived competence, which is pretty large, and negative 0.23 to imposter syndrome, so both supporting our hypotheses there. As one felt that they were losing to their rival, they felt less competent, and they felt more like an imposter, essentially. In terms of mediation, we only found one significant relationship. The perceived competence did mediate for relative standing, but nothing else did. But perhaps our most interesting finding is that we did find a significant moderation result for rival status. So if you look at that graph in the middle, the one that's pretty big and kind of colorful that I'm really proud of, shout out to ggplot on R. But nonetheless, what we found was that women that had a rival had significantly greater STEM turnover intent. They had a greater desire to leave their STEM field. Whereas for men, the relationship was not significant, but was trending in the opposite direction. So it appears that having a rival is particularly harmful for women, and maybe not so much for men, as it specifically relates to the idea of turnover intent. In terms of implications, that is implications based on all of the findings. We have psychological well-being, we had relationships to psychological well-being, perceived competence, and imposter syndrome, which are obviously things that we don't really want. We want people to feel competent, and we don't want them to feel like they're faking it at work. We also found relationships to job turnover intent and STEM turnover intent. Related specifically to STEM, that's meaningful because, like I said, there are millions of unfilled jobs. And if we can get women to not leave these fields at such a great rate, those numbers would go down, which is really ideal because STEM jobs are not only important for innovation, but they pay more than most jobs do. So it also helps the individuals themselves. So that's really all I have in terms of a formal presentation. I love answering questions on this. So whatever you want to know, please ask, and I'm more than happy to answer it. If I don't have the answer, I'll look it up for you because I probably have it in my data set somewhere.
Cool.
Yeah.
Why do you think that, oh, I sound echoey, I apologize. Why do you think that having a rival is more detrimental or impactful for the women than the men?
So there's a few things I think could be going on there. The first part is based on social role theory, Eagly. And what she finds is that men and women basically have different stereotypes. One of those stereotypes for men is they're supposed to be ambitious and ruthless and achievement-oriented and business acumen and all of that stuff. So competitions for them are kind of acceptable. Whereas for women, they're kind of always taught to be communal rather than agentic. So it might just be a larger stressor for them to have this psychologically important comparison that they're making over and over many times a day, one way or the other. That would be my hunch.
Joe, do you think it matters for women if their rival is men or women?
So we actually looked at that. Unfortunately, just because of how hard it is to sample that many people, we weren't really able to get an adequate sample size for it. So we didn't find significance. However, I did hypothesize that. I wagered that that would be there in a larger sample. But the one thing that is worth noting is that women reported women as rivals at twice the rate that men. Women reported having a woman rival at twice the rate that women reported having a man rival. So it does appear that for the most part they don't choose, but their rivals do tend to be women.
Very interesting. I see there's a question in the chat. Are you aware if there are similar correlations with minorities in STEM for both men and women?
That is a great question. I believe your name is pronounced Jamantre, so thank you so much for your question. We are intending to look at that. Unfortunately, in this sample, we primarily ended up having, it was 66% white, so it was kind of hard to draw ideas related to the idea of minorities. I did submit a grant related to that specific topic. Unfortunately, it was not funded the first time, so we're going to try again. But that is a question I am interested in looking at. The one thing I will say that did pop up in the data is that for Black respondents, which was not a large amount of people, I think it was 50 people, they did report a higher average rivalry intensity than did other demographic groups. So there may very well be something there. Anybody else? You're welcome. And thank you for your question. I'm happy to hear that you also think my grant would be interesting. It's always encouraging.
Yeah, hopefully you get that.
Yeah, that'd be ideal. Money helps with research. That's what I learned during my thesis.
Yes. Yeah. And one thing leads to another. One grant leads to another. So keep it going.
That's what I hear. I'll get the first domino to fall.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Cool. All right. Well, thank you all for listening. I appreciate it a ton. I love talking about my stuff.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Just a reminder, too, to everybody that these posters are all in the main session where you logged in for the main meeting. And there's a tab there for posters. And you can see the video, you can see the poster, you can zoom in and find out anything that you need on it. And everybody's email address, the presenter's email addresses are there. So if you have questions or follow-up comments that you want to find out more about later as you get to thinking about it, please go there, and there's a way to reach out to each of our presenters. All right, so let me pull up our next presenter. Is also, is it there? Let's see. There you go. Our next presenter is also from University of South Florida, Katrina Konen. I'll let you tell about yourself, Katrina.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Katrina. I'm a second year IO student, also at USF. I apologize for any background noise. There's construction going on that I don't have much control over. So I'll be talking about my project looking at burnout, resilience, and turnover intentions among disaster response workers. In the pandemic for the last year or so now, employees have reported a general increase in burnout associated with COVID-19. And the disaster response workforce has been working more than responding to the co-occurring pandemic through contact tracing and vaccination station setups, as well as disaster events like the record-setting hurricane season of 2020. So job burnout is comprised of three facets: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization or cynicism, and reduced professional efficacy. And high levels of job burnout have been associated with increased levels of turnover intention. Also, resilience has been defined as the capacity of individuals to cope successfully with significant change, adversity, or risk, and has also been shown through previous research that it may act as a buffer against the negative symptoms of burnout, but more research needs to be done on solidifying that relationship. So for our current study, I was interested to assess the relationship between burnout, resilience, and turnover intentions in this historically understudied population of disaster response workers in the context of the co-occurring pandemic and disaster response or record hurricane season. And I hypothesized that higher levels of burnout would be associated with increased turnover intention, and also higher levels of resilience would be associated with lower levels of turnover intention. Sorry. So we had a sample of 106 individuals working in disaster response or emergency management. The sample was mostly male, mostly white, and had a mean age of around 41 years old. And the data was collected between October 2020 through December 2020, so kind of in the heart of the hurricane season. And it's very small, but we ran a multiple regression, and you can see some scatter plots on the screen. But we found that the exhaustion and cynicism facets of burnout had a direct significant impact on turnover intentions. So the more exhausted or cynical someone was, the more likely they were to turn over from either their current job or the field at large. But we did not find any significant relationship between professional efficacy or resilience and turnover intentions. Also, the proposed model of using burnout and resilience to predict turnover intentions accounted for about 44% of the variance in turnover intentions in the sample, which is pretty large. So the findings of the current study add to the literature around burnout, resilience, and turnover intentions in its disaster response emergency management sample, and lead to an understanding of what this workforce goes through in terms of burnout. We had high levels of emotional exhaustion and turnover, and cynicism had a significant effect on turnover intentions, while professional efficacy and resilience did not. So future research should look more into these relationships a little bit more and specifically address the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on burnout in this disaster response workforce. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. If you have any, I'm happy to answer.
how does this compare to the research? Like that seems like a really high number to me, 44.5%. Like that's a whopper that I've ever
Yeah.
seen. How does that compare to what you would typically find in relation to burnout facets and turnover intent to be in a regular sample under regular conditions? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's definitely larger than a regular sample in regular conditions. I don't have the specific number off the top of my head, but I could get it to you after if you're interested. But it is really interesting, and that's why I'd like to parse it out a little bit further and maybe do a follow-up study, like a mixed methods of, what about the COVID-19 pandemic and the hurricane season was so stressful and led to an increase in burnout and turnover intentions. But I think in this disaster response workforce at large, turnover intentions are pretty common. From what I've read and what I've learned from talking to people in the workforce, it's pretty common for people to kind of leave one job and go to another in a different county or a different section.
I know they listed the age, which is 41. So I imagine that they probably all had a pretty lengthy amount of job tenure. Did you happen to look at how much time they had spent in the job previously?
Not for this study, no. But we have a large data set that we're going to do a couple different projects. So that might be something we look into in the future.
Very cool. Any other questions, anybody? Awesome. Okay.
Thank you,
Katrina. Appreciate it. And let me. Okay, and now I'm going to bring up from University of Florida this time, a change. You Luo.
Okay, so thank you for your introduction, Ms. Fredman. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yue Luo, a PhD student from the University of Florida and a member of the UF Human System Engineering Lab. Our poster presented today is about the effects of smartphone usage on pedestrians' walking behaviors. As you all know, smartphone dependency has become a serious concern for pedestrian safety. The phone use rate on the road is pretty high, accompanied with high possibility of injuries. However, knowing this fact, we still keep our hands and eyes on the phones while walking on the street, in the fear of suffering from injuries. This conflicting situation is one important reason for us to study the effect of phone usage on walking in the public environment. And therefore, our group conducted a study to investigate the effect of smartphone operations on walking behaviors, specifically on human gait and posture during outdoor walking. In the study, 8 college students were suited up by 17 inertial sensors and performed 24 walking trials with different phone operations, including walking only, which is WO in the poster, walking while reading, which is WR, walking while texting, which is WT, and walking while gaming, which is WG. We can show in the results, participants showed a decreased gait speed and a larger neck flexion with phone usage while walking, and they tended to use less of their proximal joint, for example, lower back and hip, and more of their distal joints, such as neck and neck, with phone usage while walking. There are some limitations in our study. Therefore, our future work will include recruitment of participants with a wider age range and also engagement of smart devices with multiple types and also models to increase our generalizability of the study. This study, together with some statistics from the phone-engaged pedestrian accident rate, could be used as evidence of the recommended level of phone engagement in public environment. Okay, that is almost all about our poster for today. Thank you for listening, and I'm open to any questions related to this project and also me.
So in general, walking while texting and so on and so forth, what are the general risks there? I imagine there probably are some significant ones, right?
Yes, because when you kind of look at the phone, your neck will flex more, and then you will have less clearance of the obstacle on the road. Like you will have less chance to see the obstacle on the road. So you will have some collision like risk factors that may cause to injuries or more even like disability, something like that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Do you have any follow-ups planned for it?
Yes. Right now we only investigated the usage of smartphones, but as the popularity of the smartwatches and other devices may pop up, we also want to investigate other smart devices, and also like the AR system is also popular right now. We are also interested to see whether the distraction from the AR devices will affect human walking or any motion behaviors.
Gotcha. Very cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you have a question in the chat as well.
Yeah. Okay. So the question is, do gait performance relate even after not using the smartphone? Okay. I'm not sure what is remain even means, but if we just consider the gait performance without using the smartphone, everyone will have their variance because if your age are different or like the gender are different, there are a lot of variance. But for our study, we kind of block this effect by treating them as the random effect. Yeah, thank you for the question.
Yeah, that's great information there. Yeah, you see everybody now on their smartphone when they're walking. It's almost a common aspect of every day.
Yeah.
And, they run into people and forget to stop at the corners and all that stuff.
There are a lot of like funny picture on the internet, like people just holding the phone and bump into maybe like something and then they didn't realize it.
Were all of your participants on campus participants?
Yeah, right now they are all college students because college students are kind of the population that like are fan into smartphones compared to other age distributions. So we want to first focus on this age populations, age distributions. Yes.
Yeah, they're probably more coordinated. I know that my mom has become a huge lover of her phone, but I don't know how often the older population walks while they're on it. So, anybody have questions for anyone? Really, I can pull up anybody's posters again if anybody has anything. No, everybody's good. The presenters can move. You have the ability to move to other rooms, or they might move us to other rooms because there's a few other presentations that are still going on. So you can do that on your own, or they might go in and ahead and do that for you. And then if you want to leave that, you can on your own. You can leave on your own. Just a couple things that they're going to do at 3:30. They're doing virtual happy hours that you can pop into. It's kind of networking. So they've got the rooms named, and you click on the room on the agenda page that you want to go into. So one will just be fun social. One is, well, kind of the same because it says talk shop or not. And the other one is going to be more professional organizations, because I know there are a couple that wanted to kind of share information that was going on within their own professional organizations. So you can pop in and out of those rooms as you wish, meet up with people that you may not have had a chance to talk to. That's the hard part about doing a virtual conference, is normally you get to have all these interactions face to face. So it's an attempt to try to get everybody an opportunity to bounce in and out. So feel free to do that at 3:30. And let me know if there's anything else you guys need. I'll just let them know we're done here, so in case they move you. But thank you all for joining and for presenting.
Thank you for organizing.
Yeah. Did anybody get to see John Howard this morning presentation? His was really, really good, actually. He's the head of the CDC and NIOSH, head of NIOSH. And you may want to go back and listen to his recording if you weren't able to hear it, because he did a really great talk. Tomorrow will be someone from Jim Beam and how they handled things during COVID. But John Howard is more NIOSH future of work, so where we're headed and what organizations to reach out to. And so it might be kind of interesting for you guys. So. At the top of your screen, there's a return to Breakout Manager that you can hit. That brings you back to the main room, and then you can see who's in other rooms, or you can just click at the top. It says you're in Breakout Room 6. You have the ability to change your breakout room. So you can do that, or you can chat with each other here, or you can head on out and do whatever you have to do.
Thanks, Kelly.
All right.
Thank you.
See you guys later.